When week one of the collapse ends, most people think the worst part is over, but that's only because they haven't lived through what comes next. The truth is simple. Week one breaks the system, week two breaks the people and the country. This is the phase I call the breakdown, and this is where the real collapse begins. Inside the major cities, the shift is unmistakable. The loud chaos of week one, the crowds, the sirens, the breaking glass, it's all slowly faded. And it's not because things are getting better. It's because everything that could be taken already has been. Stores have been stripped bare. Pharmacies are gutted. Gas stations have been drained and hospitals are left barely functioning. The noise dies not from peace, but from exhaustion. And in that silence, the predators start to move. Now, this is no longer the desperate mobs from the first 72 hours. These ones are strategic. They're the ones who waited, who made a plan, and who know how to exploit the power vacuum. These are organized crews. It's not random looters anymore. They'll move through apartment buildings, floor by floor, then neighborhoods house by house and block by block, taking food, batteries, tools, medicine, weapons, and fuel. They aren't guessing what has value because they already know. And while the urban core fractures into zones of control, the suburbs begin to unravel in a different, quieter, more personal way. Week one in suburbia is built on denial. People stay indoors, they talk to neighbors, they share supplies, and they check on the elderly. They still believe the government is mobilizing and repairs are underway. But week two brings a different kind of silence, a silence made of pure worry and desperation, because the food in most homes is gone. The bottled water, long gone. Generators have been out of fuel. Insulin, inhalers, blood pressure meds is starting to run dry. This is when the neighborhood smiles completely disappear. And at that point, the people you live next to for years start looking at each other a little bit differently. Not as neighbors or friends, but as pure competition. One family decides to ration. Another decides they're not going to. Another decides the neighborhood owes them something. And each decision becomes a fracture line running between houses all the way down the entire street. Arguments in driveways, suspicious looks across fences, people watching windows at night, people counting who comes and who goes. The suburbs don't collapse with riots, they collapse into paranoia. Meanwhile, the urban collapse doesn't stay contained. It spills outward like a shockwave. Tens of thousands of people who survived the first week inside the cities now begin migrating outward, looking for food, water, medicine, safety, anything they can get their hands on. Some people come politely, some come begging, others come ready for violence. Every major highway becomes a corridor of abandoned cars and walking families. Every rural road becomes a funnel point. Every suburban neighborhood becomes a pressure zone. Now we're going to shift to something most people never really consider, the breakdown on a national level. Because while individuals are trying to survive, the country around them is falling apart. State governments no longer have fuel for emergency vehicles. National Guard units are stretched thin, some guarding distribution centers, some protecting critical infrastructure, some simply defending their own bases. Federal agencies stop communicating clearly because their own internal systems start failing. Supply lines between states collapse. Trucking routes, they're all but over. No diesel means no transport. No transport means no resupply of anything. Food, medicine, chlorine for water treatment, fuel for generators, parts for power stations. Entire regions begin to shut down in different ways. One region struggles with water contamination. Another loses power permanently. Another experiences civil unrest. Another experiences mass migration. Another is locked down by state just to maintain order. And without national coordination, every region becomes its own isolated crisis. This is where the psychological collapse begins to accelerate. Because most people are not built to handle prolonged uncertainty. Fear, danger, that's something that can be endured, but not uncertainty, knowing whether tomorrow brings rescue or ruin. Some people shut down emotionally. Some become aggressive. Some paranoid. Some become opportunistic. Some cling to any authority figure they can find, and some finally realize there's no authority figures left. This is when the morals begin to shift. What was unthinkable last week becomes reasonable this week. Taking food left behind in a store becomes taking food from an empty house, which becomes taking food from an occupied house. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. And then suddenly, once the hunger takes over, the parents with starving children become unpredictable. People who relied on medication begin to unravel mentally. Addictions flare without access to product or treatment. Violence increases, not out of malice, out of pure desperation. And then comes the most dangerous transformation of all. People stop believing the collapse is temporary. This is the moment society truly dies. Because as long as people think help is coming, they restrain themselves. They cooperate, wait, and have hope. But once that belief dies, the rules die with it. Urban areas fall apart violently. Suburban areas fall apart quietly. Rural areas become fortified islands. States behave like independent countries. Federal authority becomes symbolic rather than effective. The nation doesn't fall in one explosion. It fractures like a glass hit in slow motion. By the end of week 2, the people who are still stable, still calm, still thinking clearly are the ones who have prepared mentally before the collapse ever started. Because survival after the first week is about mindset. It's about discipline. It's about knowing when to stay invisible, when to move, when to blend in, and most importantly, when to say no. Week 1 is chaos. Week 2 is the full collapse. And if you can survive this phase, you might just make it onto the next stage. This is Appalachian Prepper. Stay vigilant, stay ready, and as always, stay safe out there.